Okay, Father, we come before you because of the shed blood of Jesus, and we come boldly to your throne of grace, and we ask you for grace. We ask you for grace and mercy upon our nation. We ask you to forgive us our transgressions, and Lord, bring righteousness to bear in our government. Lord, restore the foundations that have been eroded, because if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? So Lord, help us in that work of restoration. Lord, I pray that the things talked about here tonight would be according to your will and would glorify you and would build up our understanding, Lord, of the calling that you have for this nation. And so we speak your blessings on tonight's proceedings. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay. So it's my pleasure to announce a person that I first heard back in, I think, May of last year at the Pints and Politics in Davenport. And when he got up and spoke, I was tremendously impressed, not only with his knowledge of the Declaration and the Constitution, but his desire to make sure that Iowa really starts to rediscover that and the meaning behind it. On top of that, he wants to run for governor, which is outstanding, because we need people in the governor position and all political positions who actually look at the Constitution and realize how important it is, because this is still the American experiment. We are still, as Lincoln was talking about, seeing whether a government of the people, by the people, and for the people can actually exist. So it's my pleasure to introduce Brad Sherman.
I was sitting back there trying to figure out where's the best place to stand. How about right here? Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Dale, thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. I appreciate it very much. And so Carol and I are happy to be here. My wife Carol is with me back there. She goes with me everywhere. We've been to almost 260 meetings in 90. This is number 260, and on Wednesday of this week we will have completed all 99 counties, and we're going to keep going after that. So we're doing grassroots. I believe Iowa is about grassroots, and so that's what we're doing. That's what our strategy is. Well, let me tell you just a little bit about myself, and then we'll get into some issues and time for questions. But I actually grew up in southeast Missouri, and my wife and I moved to Iowa City in 1981 to start a church, and we were reaching out to University of Iowa students, and so we've been there for 45 years as a pastor. Now, I met my wife on August 15th, 1974, and we got married 5 months later because her dad wouldn't let us get married sooner. And so if you do the math, we'll be married 51 years in just a few days, next Sunday. So 51 years. And she's my secret weapon. I tell everybody she's my secret weapon. But the same night I met her was the same night that I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ. And she and I have been walking together with our Lord ever since. And we went into ministry training down there. Now, when I grew up, my dad had an excavating company, so I grew up driving dozers and drag lines, and we did a lot of drainage work for farms. Drag lines, we did a lot, mostly just cleaning out existing ditches. We dug some new ditches, but mainly cleaning out the existing ones, because if they get plugged up and the water backs up, then your farm turns into a swamp, and you don't want a swamp in your farm, right? And we don't want a swamp in government, so I like to tell people I literally have swamp draining experience. And so we're going to bring that to Des Moines as well. So there's a lot of swamp that needs to be drained, a lot of swamp that people aren't acknowledging there in Des Moines. But so we went into ministry training, and I moved to Iowa City in 1981. Like I said, we saw the indoctrination that was taking place at the University of Iowa with so many students coming in. They come in believing in God, believing in America. They leave with those values stripped right out of them. And so we saw that our foundational principles were being removed. that was a threat to our freedom. And so that launched us into getting involved politically. I've spent a lot of years involved in grassroots politics. I've been a county chair. I've led caucuses. I helped presidential campaigns all the way back to Pat Robertson, then Mike Huckabee and Michelle Bachmann, all the way up to President Trump. As I said, I've been a county chair, been to all the district and state and conventions, all the way to the national convention, served on the national platform committee as well. So a lot of grassroots experience. And so we, during those 45 years of pastoring, I've done several other things. I've done some home building, some real estate development. I was a co-founder and board chair of Informed Choices Medical Clinics. And we had 5 or 6 medical clinics around the state of Iowa, and I was the president and board chair of that for 10 years. And so we were saving the unborn. That was something I'm very happy to have been a part of doing that. And so we've just been involved in lots of different things. We traveled around the state doing foundational seminars to restore the foundations of freedom. Little PowerPoint presentation, something like Dale did here tonight. We've got a whole system of PowerPoint slides that talk about restoring these principles that our nation was founded on, the principles upon which our freedoms rest. So these things are very, very important to me. I've been doing them. Our campaign slogan is restoring the foundations of freedom, and that's not just a slogan. That's been our heartbeat for 10 years, or for 4 decades, actually, more than 10 years. So that's a big part of what we've been doing. A lot more things like that. I'm a big Second Amendment supporter. I'm a hobby gunsmith. I like to build custom revolvers. You know, I heard you talk about carrying your gun over there, and I just think of myself as a red-blooded, blue-collar American who God said, hey, I want you to go do something politically, and so here we go. We're doing that. So we moved to, I was running for the State House in 2022. I ran for the State House. I won that election, and I served in Des Moines as a state representative. I probably would have run again, except that in 2023, we had a daughter passed away, and so we made a decision to move to a different district, and the result of that was I gave up my seat and recruited a good guy to run in my seat, and he's doing a great job now. But that's when we started thinking about, God, we're not done yet. We're not finished. And so that's when we said, people started saying you should run for governor. And so I didn't think about it too seriously at the point, but we started praying about it, and the more we prayed about it, God kept confirming it over and over and over. Confirmation after confirmation after confirmation started coming. And it got to the point where it was so clear, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I feel like it's a calling. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that's what God's called us to do. And we're all in on this, and we're not looking back. We're going straight forward with everything we have. And so, in fact, I've been joking lately that we have more confirmations on this than a Lutheran middle school. And so, I told that to a Lutheran pastor the other day. He got a big kick out of that one. So, but anyway. We do have 3 other children. We got 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 1 daughter watching from heaven tonight. Like I said, we have 2 sons that serve in the military. One's an Iraqi war veteran who won the Bronze Star for bravery under fire. I got another son who's an Air Force captain, and he's deployed full-time right now in Des Moines. And we got a daughter in Iowa City that just helps us so much, and she's a huge help to us, and we're proud of all their children. Let me get to a few key points. Dale was referring to the Declaration of Independence, and I've been hearing this so much, but I think it's probably because of the 250th anniversary. I mean, this is the birth certificate of our nation. And so this is one of those foundations of freedom that we have to restore back to our educational systems. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I like to think of it as there's 5 that's in the Declaration. That all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And that among these rights are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And then the last one I don't have down quite so pat, but it basically says, and that when any form of government becomes destructive to those means, it is the right of the people to abolish or alter that government and institute new forms of government that most likely to secure their happiness. And so, folks, we need to I don't think we need to abolish our government. We just need to alter it because it's gotten off track. And we need to alter our government right now. So there's so many principles there. But one of the most basic principles that we find in those principles about the Declaration of Independence is that rights come from God. They're endowed to us by our Creator, and the purpose of government is to secure those rights. Rights come from God, not government. There's so many people that think our rights are supposed to come from government. It doesn't. It comes from God, and government's supposed to protect our God-given rights. Yet our government has gotten to the point where they tell us we're not supposed to talk about God anymore. Yet it's right there in the birth certificate of our nation, the Creator. The Iowa Constitution tells us about our Supreme Being. It says we owe gratitude to the Supreme Being for the blessings we have hitherto enjoyed, and we feel dependence upon Him for the continuation of those blessings. It's right in our Iowa Constitution, the preamble. The Constitution of our United States is signed at the end in the year of our Lord, a reference to Jesus Christ. Article 1, 2, 3 of the United States Constitution is based on Isaiah 33:22, which talks about the judge, our king, and our lawgiver, and our king. The three branches of government comes from Isaiah 33:22. God is an integral part of this nation's founding, and we have to restore those foundations back again. And we have to put those in there. And then we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, pursuit of happiness, again, it's about our finances, it's about our property. And so that's one of the big issues I've been hearing all around the state we've been going to, is talking about our property rights, particularly when it comes to the issue of the carbon capture pipeline. You know, I mean, I've been fighting against that since day one in the legislature. And, you know, it's just this simple. You know, whenever you have a private company who's not a common carrier for a product that's not a public utility, you should never, ever get to use eminent domain for that. It's just that simple. That should be the end of the issue right there. But unfortunately, some things are so simple you need a lawyer to misunderstand it sometimes. But that's kind of how it works, unfortunately. But nevertheless, that should be a simple issue. Besides, there's so many other issues, reasons that the carbon capture pipeline shouldn't be. Secondly, it's dangerous. If it ever ruptured, it could wipe out an entire city, you know, with carbon dioxide smothering everything that breathes oxygen. And then the third point about it is that CO2 does not hurt our atmosphere in the first place. Plants need CO2 to grow. Now, I believe in clean air and clean water as much as the next person, but CO2 is not the problem. CO2 does not pollute our atmosphere. And I had a top scientist at one of our state universities tell me, he said, there's nothing humans can do to create enough CO2 that's going to hurt our atmosphere. And then he said, but I can't say that or I would lose my job. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to stop that kind of a violation of our freedom of speech and freedom to even think freely and solve problems. We can't solve problems if we're afraid to actually tell what the solution is. And that's what's going on in our culture. So anyway, I get a little revved up about these things, but these are huge issues that we have to address, and they're right there in our Declaration of Independence. And that's what Pursuit of Happiness was about, property. And then property taxes is another big issue that has to do with our property. You know, property taxes have just gone sky high. The increase in price homes and assessment values has gone through the roof. And so, you know, there have been some caps put on the amount of how much they can raise property taxes. But the problem is that they just keep assessing it higher. So they only 2% of a raise in taxes, but they keep assessing things higher and higher. So we've got some real problems, and I'm hoping they're going to be able to fix that, or at least some of it in this session. I'm watching that very closely. So those are important issues. And when we come to the liberty part of it, you know, what happened during COVID was an absolute trampling of our rights. You know, that should never have happened. We should never have shut down our state, our businesses. It crippled the economy of the state. We're still recovering from the economic damage that was done to our state because of COVID. And, you know, besides the issues with vaccines that injured people, besides the fact that these things were forced on people, besides the fact that doctors were told they couldn't try something else without losing their license, you know, this was tyranny at its worst that happened during COVID. And one of the things that really bothers me is that we heard when COVID was all over, our governor stood up, and I heard this with my own ears, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But there it was on video. She said, "We kept Iowa open during COVID." And I'm like, no, what world are you living in? We did not keep Iowa open during COVID. And they usually say, well, we were better than some states. Well, that's not the standard, folks. The standard is our constitutional rights that were trampled on. So We didn't keep Iowa open. In fact, when I was in the legislature, I filed a bill in the House as a companion bill to Sandy Salmon's Senate bill. And in that bill, it would cut back the governor's emergency powers so that there can only do one declaration of emergency, and you can't extend it after that without going to the legislature. And as governor, I'll be happy to sign that bill because the governor's office is not something that should be a dictator's office. And so after 60 days, it's not an emergency anymore. After 60 days, you can get heads together and figure out what's the best action to take. And so I'd be happy to sign that bill. So that COVID was a trampling of our liberties. And then we have another big liberty issue that's going on in our state with human trafficking. There's hardly any other way to describe that except it's just like modern day slavery. And so I don't know, there's lots of reports on how bad it is or isn't, but I'm telling you, it is a serious problem. And so that's one of the things I will focus on immediately as governor is to begin rooting out human trafficking. And we need more agents and more resources being devoted to this. And Mark Thompson, a good friend of mine who's a state representative, filed the bill in 2022 to change human trafficking from a Class D felony to a Class A felony. And then recently we've had the first person was prosecuted under that bill. How's that? Okay. That first person was prosecuted under that bill, and now they're in they're serving life in prison without parole. And so that's a huge step forward in that, but there's a lot more work to do. So these are some passionate issues of mine. And then, of course, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Liberty and pursuit of happiness doesn't mean much if you're dead. So life is a huge issue. And so we have to really build a culture of respect for life. And I already told you about my pro-life work that I've done. And so I believe the heartbeat bill was a good step forward. We prevented surgical abortions up, before 6 weeks or after 6 weeks. But I believe life should be protected from conception to natural death. And so I think we've got more work to do. And one of the problems with the heartbeat bill is that it may have prevented surgical abortions, but now we've got chemical abortions, mail-in abortion pills that are coming into Iowa, and there's no way of tracking that. And we don't even know how many abortions are taking place in Iowa right now because there's no way to track it. And so we need some stiffer laws to prevent abortion pills because these pills are even more dangerous sometimes than surgical abortions because of the complications that result, and there's no doctor oversight over them. And it's just a mess. And we have to respect life more than that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, when we talk about life, we go all the way to the other end of life, which is elder care. And I've been hearing some stories recently about some things that need to be done when it comes to protecting elders, particularly in nursing homes. Now, I realize we have some really good people taking care of our elders in nursing homes, but there's some bad actors out there too, and so we need some laws to protect those people as well. One simple law that we could do is just have a family should be allowed to put a security camera in the room of their loved one, because that's where they live. That becomes their home, and they should have the right to do that. And right now, that's illegal, and we need to get that one changed. So that's a big issue. But life is a huge issue. The beginning and the end of life is important, but the life in the middle is important as well. So we've got some of the highest cancer rates in the nation. We need to address that. We need to get some studies done that are done by independent people who don't have a conflict of interest attached to the outcome of that study. And that's one of the things I'm going to push for very strongly as governor, to make sure that we do the kind of studies that can give us the answers that we need so that we can figure out how to fix that problem. And then we've got a mental health crisis going on, particularly with our veterans. We need to support our veterans, and they're dealing with a lot of mental health issues, and people in general. And we closed down a lot of facilities several years back that probably shouldn't have been closed down. They closed them down just to try to save some lowered property taxes, I think was the reason, but it never did. So where that money went is a big issue. So there are many issues here. I just want to get back to this, restoring this foundation of freedom. George Mason, who is known as the father of Bill of Rights, he said if free people don't examine their liberties and how they were obtained, they risk losing these rights. And so we have to understand how our liberties were achieved. Otherwise, our liberties will be gone before we realize it, and we won't recognize that they're being undermined, and then it'll be too late. I like to put it this way. If we don't know how government is supposed to work, we won't know when it's not working. And so we really need to put these educational principles about our government back into our school system, and it's not being taught right now. And there's a quote by Thomas Jefferson that I like to use. I like to use it a lot because it's got a lot in it. But he said, "I know of no safe depositor of the ultimate powers of a society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education." And he said, this is the true correction for abuses of the Constitution. So there's a lot in that. But folks, first off, there's only one safe place to store our liberties, and government is not it. The only safe place to store our liberties is in the people. And Jefferson also said, inform the people, inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberties. And so if the people are not enlightened enough to exercise that responsibility or that control with the wholesome discretion, what's the remedy? We have to educate them. So it's more than just, reaching out to the young people. We have to do that. But we also have to inform their discretion by education and put these foundational principles back into our educational system so that when they graduate from school, they understand what made America great. So that, and if we don't understand what made America great, we won't be able to make America great again. But we must teach these principles in our schools. Our schools are I know we've got some good examples out there, but in large part, it's a mess. We need to get rid of this Common Core and put common sense back into our schools. We need to teach our kids, get away from the screens and the addiction to screens, particularly in the lower grades. And they need to learn how to do long division on paper. They need how to memorize their multiplication tables and write cursive and do addition and subtraction with a pencil and paper. They need to learn all that before they start getting onto the screens. When I was in school, using a calculator was called cheating. But nowadays this is just standard knowledge, and there's so many foundational things that kids are just not learning. But getting the civics education back into our schools is important too. So that's going to be a major part of what I want to do as governor, is just rework our educational systems and get back to some good old common sense American values and put those things back into our education. And when we do that, we're going to see a turnaround happen, and I don't think it will take that long. In fact, that's why I wrote this little book. There's a little book here called The Freedom Quiz. I wrote this before I ever thought I would ever run for office 12, 14 years ago. It was just a tool I wanted to use to help educate people on some of the founding principles of America. And so I thought it would fit good for the campaign, so I put a new cover on it, called it a campaign edition, and printed up a bunch of them, and we've been giving them away all over the state. I want to encourage you folks to take one of these tonight. They're free because it's just a little tool that helps with what I'm talking about here. So let me just wrap up here, and then before we get to questions, 4 promises I've been making around the state everywhere we go. And that is, the first promise is, if you make a mistake, you have to admit it. I mentioned the whole COVID thing. It would be really refreshing to hear our leader get up and say, we did what we thought was best during COVID, but it turns out it was wrong, and we made a mistake, and we're never going to let that happen again. Wouldn't that be refreshing to hear that? Instead of a gaslighting statement like we kept Iowa open. We just have to speak the truth. Nobody knows everything. I told Mike Huckabee I was going to run for governor, and he's a friend of ours, and I said, and he knows a thing or two about governing, and he said something to me that I will never forget. He said, the most dangerous person in the room is the guy who doesn't know that he doesn't know. And when you hear a guy say, "Oh, I can go from day one. I don't need to learn. There's no learning curve for me." Well, that's a dangerous person, according to Mike Huckabee, because life is a learning curve. Anybody ever figured that out? There's a learning curve to life, and we're always learning some things. And if we get to the point where we're not learning anymore, then we probably won't be very effective. So there's always something to learn. So if you make a mistake, you have to admit it. Nobody knows everything. The second promise I've been making is that I promise I will not please everyone. And of course that goes without saying, right? But here's my point. My point is that I have my core values. I know what they are, and they're not going to change. And when those get challenged, I'm not changing, and I know I'm not going to please everyone at that point. And if you don't have those core values down in the beginning, then you're probably going to mess up in a big way. But I know what those core values is, so I absolutely promise I will not please everyone, or even try to. And then the third promise is this, is I will not be bought. Government is not for sale. And, you know, I've been in the State House. I got a pretty good look under the hood up there. And I can tell you this, a lot of money changes hands. A lot of big donations take place. And it sure seems to me like people base their definition of right and wrong based on what their big donor wants them to do. And I've been making this promise. No donation is going to change my definition of right and wrong. I've been at this long enough, and I'm old enough not to be worried about it. I'm not looking for a new career. I'm in this for the future of my grandkids and their kids. And I want to see, and I love our nation, and I want to see and I love our state, and I want to see us become a free people again and exercise the freedom that God gave us in our Declaration of Independence. And so I won't be bought. Government's not for sale, and that's a promise. And the fourth promise is that I'm going to seek Almighty God with all my heart through prayer and wise counselors, and I always include wise counselors because nobody has a corner on hearing from God either. You know, we do our best, but nobody has the corner on that market. And so I'm going to seek God through prayer and wise counselors to make decisions that have to be made. And because some things are black and white, and it's pretty easy to know what's right and wrong. But I'm telling you, there are a lot of issues and a lot of these bills that come through Des Moines, and they've got a lot of convoluted twists and turns in them, and it takes a lot of wisdom. And so God says if we will seek Him and ask Him for wisdom, He will give it to us. And so I absolutely promise we're going to seek God through prayer and wise counselors, and we're going to see. I'm going to open up some rooms in the executive portion of the Capitol building for a lot more prayer to take place over this state. So that's something that I'm going to do. Finally, the last thing is we need to be an army of truth tellers. You know, in that conversation I had with Mike Huckabee, we were talking about why it is that people like President Trump. And Mike put it this way. He said, if you go into a smaller cafe out in farm country someplace and there's 4 farmers sitting around a table nursing a cup of coffee, and then they lean in close and whisper something, and then they lean back and nod their heads. He said what they just said in private, Trump says out loud. And I thought that was a pretty good way to put it. You know, that's why people like Trump. Agree with him or not, at least you know what he's thinking. And he just tells it like it is. And so what we need in this country is an army of truth tellers, of people who tell it like it is and aren't afraid to speak up, just like that guy that said, I can't say what I believe about CO2 or I'd lose my job. That kind of cancel culture needs to get canceled. You know, there's a quote by George Orwell he said, in a world filled with lies and deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. And so we need truth speakers, an army of truth tellers who will just say it like it is. And I could tell already by sitting in this room, there's a bunch of truth tellers in here. They'll just say it like it is. It's really good to hear you guys just speak up and say it like it is. But I'm just telling you, that's the kind of people we have to be to raise up that army of truth tellers. And so, and I want to close with one more thing. You know, a lot of people have been saying, well, how can you beat Rob Sand? You know, he's running to the middle. And Dale made an excellent point when he was talking about how, you know, there's a generation of voters out there who aren't party-based. They're just fed up with a lot of things. And so because Republicans have been in charge for so long, there's a significant number of people out there who are thinking, well, I'm going to go the other side for a while because these people have frustrated me. Well, I think I'm the only candidate in this race right now in the Republican side who has a strong point to counter that. And that is that I got in this race early on before Governor Reynolds said she wasn't going to run again. And I'm the only one that did. And in fact, I called her in November of 24 and I said, listen, I don't know your plans for sure, so it's a little awkward making this call, but I'm just telling you that God's made it clear to us, and so I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to run for governor. And she said, well, I bet that was an awkward call to make. And it was a little bit, but I just felt like I had to do it. I thought it was a respectful thing to do. I believe in being a straight shooter. So that's what I did. I called her and told her. And then we announced our campaign in February, on February 17th, and had our kickoff event on the 22nd. And then in April of 25, she said she wasn't going to run again. So when she said that, it made me look like I knew what I was doing, didn't it? So, but anyway, I'm the only candidate that got in this race before she got out, and that shows that I'm the only one that has proven that I'm willing to go up against the status quo and the establishment and do what's right, because I believe in doing what's right. The other guys all got in afterwards because they saw an opportunity. Now, I'm not going to, bash them for that decision. They've got a right to do that. But I just think that's a strong point, that I'm willing to challenge the status quo. And I think that's what it's going to take to convince voters to keep voting on our side of the ticket instead of going backwards to the Democrat side of the ticket. So that's going to be one of my main points. And so I'll just close with that. I'm looking forward to debating Rob Sand. He's got a lot of issues that need to be exposed. I just know that I don't think Iowa wants to build their house on the sand. And so when it comes November, we're going to pound sand. All right? So, all right. Well, that's all I got. So any questions you have, we'll take a stab at them. So, yes, sir.
Yeah. Is it true that this state is number 2 in cancer cases?
I've heard that we're 2 or 3, and I've also heard that we're the only state that has increasing rates. Yeah.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, the thing that most people always think of immediately is farm chemicals. I'd like to see the studies. There may be a lot of truth to that. I don't know which chemicals and how and where. There's another issue too that I think, radon is, we have a lot of radon in Iowa, more than a lot of states, but that only causes one kind of cancer, lung cancer. So if it's another kind of cancer, you can't blame it on radon. But I think if we did the studies, that's kind of what I'm talking about earlier, that if we did the studies and there was no conflict of interest and we get independent organizations doing these studies, that's what I want to make sure, that we've got people that aren't going to you can't hire the pharmaceutical industry to do these studies because they make too much money off cancer treatment. You got to get somebody else to do this. And I know some chemists that could at least provide the oversight for these studies, who could really spot funny business in these studies. And so I think that's one of the things we have to do. So that's a big issue when it comes to cancer rates. Anyway, there are other things. I think the food freedom I heard mentioned tonight, that's a big issue, and something I'm very much in favor of. I think if we would grow the food that we actually eat here in Iowa and get rid of the regulations so you can buy from your neighbors and do that. I mean, I saw that on the question sheet, but I've already been talking about that around the state. I know some people that are farming and rebuilding the soil and creating some very healthy crops. I think that could be a big issue when it comes to restoring our health in our state and when it comes to cancer. But I know that's about all I have right now thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. My brother is dying from being exposed to Agent Orange.
Mm-hmm.
And he's telling me that the same ingredients that go into Agent Orange are also used in Roundup. Now, if that's the case, what would you do about that?
Well, again, we have to prove that, and I know some chemists that can really do that kind of research, but we've got to get the studies because, I know farmers out there that just lose their mind if you accuse Roundup of being the problem, because they think, how can we grow a crop without Roundup? We got weeds that would take over. And so
They might have to cultivate.
Yeah, they might have to cultivate. But the point is, I think if we had the clear studies, I think farmers want to do the right thing, and we just have to give them the alternatives. And I think there are some alternatives out there. Cultivation is one of them. Regen farming. There's a lot of people getting into regenerative farming now. I have this phrase going through my mind a lot, and I don't know where it came from. It just appeared one day, but it was this, that if we heal our soil, we will heal Iowa. And I really believe that because our soil is so scorched with chemicals. And so that's a problem. And I know one guy who is very smart in all these areas. He knows a lot of information. In fact, I talked to him today on the phone, and I asked him, and he was just talking about the flooding that took place over in Rock Valley in northwest Iowa. And they did comparative studies, and they've got the data and the facts on it. But the amount of water runoff, and we're just talking about flooding, not the chemicals, but the amount of water runoff on a healthy soil compared to a field that's been scorched by chemicals, the amount of water that soaks into the healthy soil is greater by a factor of at least 5. And so the amount of flooding that would be prevented if we had healthy soil would be huge, and then that would prevent erosion, which would also prevent things from washing into our streams. And so there's just a chain reaction here that takes place. So there's a lot to this issue of getting our soil healthy again. And another thing that this could do as well is that you can make, if we can get small family farms operating again and rebuild rural Iowa with small family farms, you don't have, so that you can actually make a living on, a smaller acreage instead of these multi-thousand acre farms. Then if you do that, that can rebuild our rural communities, and we really need to do that. We've been losing population, and that's a big issue when it comes to property taxes too, because if we spread out the tax burden, then everybody's property taxes can go down. But if we have fewer people, then the same people have to provide the same level of services for the same roads and what have you. So property taxes go up. So there's just there's no one answer for any of these issues. They're all interlinked. And that's what I think a lot of people fail to understand, and they just get focused on one issue. So that's really important. So
what about our water supply?
Well, our water tables are down, the aquifers are down, and even the aquifers are, I think, in danger of contamination. Particularly when we come to this CO2 pipeline, the CO2 pipeline would require billions of gallons of water to cool the CO2 as they're compressing it. And we don't have that kind of water available. Water shortage is becoming a real issue. And so if we conserve our water, I think that would be huge. But the water in our streams, I know the phosphates, we got that pretty much under control. Nitrates are still a problem. But the water supply, yeah, I think all these things we're talking about would affect the water supply. Yes, sir.
Two questions for you.
Yeah.
One, I listen to Simon Conway a lot, and he has. Have you ever been on Simon Conway yet?
3 times. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you're. That's one question. The other one is on the property taxes. Do you have any idea how you could? What's your vision as far as kind of mixing this? There's a big issue here.
Yeah.
With property taxes.
Yeah, well, I know Simon is really into getting rid of them altogether.
Right.
He talks about that. And first time I was on the show, he really kind of, pushed me on that issue. I said, well, I'm all for getting rid of property taxes if you can show me how to do it in a way where we still have our public services, because they have to be paid for some way. He goes, well, I just want to know if you're for getting rid of them. I said, if you can show me a way to make it work,
That's the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
You got an idea how to maybe somewhat of an idea to start leaning that way?
Yeah, so let's talk about this for just a minute. And then the next time I was on Simon Conway, he asked me that again. And so and I told him the same answer. So after we got off the air, I said, so Simon, so what's your plan? He goes, well, we just need to get rid of them. And I said, how would you pay for your essential services? He goes, it'll probably be a sales tax. I said, well, if you do a sales tax, then it's going to have to be collected on a state level, and that's centralized government. Otherwise, if you just let it be collected locally, then some counties have all the retail, other counties have almost no retail. Some counties will go broke, others will get rich. I said, and he goes, well, the state would have to step in. I said, Simon, that's what I just said. And it's like he hadn't even thought it through yet, And so anyway, and then the third time I was on the show, he treated me with a little more respect because I think he realized I was thinking, you know, and something he hadn't thought of. But the point is, in some way, we have to pay for our essential services. And I'll tell you on property taxes, here's what I'm thinking. The first thing I think we need to do is get transparency in our spending across the board in our state. The first thing we have to address is overspending. Some places are not overspending, but I think there are some places that are. And that's why I'm advocating for a real auditor. Abigail Moss is going to be here soon, and she'll explain this to you, but she wants to establish a statewide software system that will put all the taxing entities on the same software system. Right now, it's almost impossible to do an audit because all the systems don't even talk to one another. They're all on different systems, and you have to have tons of manpower to do an audit. And then it takes 2 or 3 years to get the result. And by the time you get the result, the issues are already gone, and nobody cares anymore about that particular issue. It's almost completely impossible to do auditing in our state right now. And with the technology we have today, we can actually do this, and it'll save a lot of man hours. It'll cost some money to get it set up, but it'll save man hours in the long run. And the money it will save, because a software system like that could flag problems immediately while they're small before they get big. And so Abby can explain this better than I can, because I'm just telling you what I've been hearing her say, and that's why I'm supporting Abigail Moss for auditor. And I am really looking forward to working with Abigail as governor, working with her as auditor. I think we can really get some changes done in terms of saving money. If we had a real auditor, we wouldn't even need Doge. You know, if we had an auditor doing their job. So that's one thing, is overspending. The other thing is, I mentioned slightly, was population growth. If we can get our rural communities and growing again, that's going to be huge to spread out the tax burden. And then I've also got a plan I've been sorting through in my mind. I'm trying to get the details on it. But I think, you know, what really burns me is that you can work most of your life to pay off a mortgage, and then after you pay off your mortgage, you still have to rent your house from the government. So I'm thinking at least, it's kind of like a big homestead exemption, at least the primary residence after you've reached retirement age should be property tax free. But you'd have to have some rules to prevent people from taking advantage of it. You'd have to, if you've lived in Iowa for 10 years, or you have to live in Iowa at least 10 years in advance to take advantage of this. And then, but think about what would happen if people plan 10 years in advance because they're going to get their primary residence tax free. That means they're going to stay in Iowa instead of move to Arizona. And then their kids might stay around them as well and raise their families. So this could help stabilize a loss of population. And then those people that stay around are going to spend money and pay taxes, which is going to spread out the burden more. So this whole system might even pay for itself. You know, it might have to have a small sales tax, statewide sales tax in the beginning to make it work. But I think it's going to make people appreciate Iowa and stay in Iowa a lot longer. So that's something I'm looking into as far as an answer to this. It's a starting place. I'm not going to pretend it's the sole answer. I think the real answer lies in just getting good people who will do the right thing. And if we can, and that goes back to the auditing. If we can expose people that don't do the right thing, then if you can go online and click and see where every dollar is being spent in your county or your city council or whatever, and you see how they're spending it, then the people themselves will probably fix this problem, because they'll elect some new people if they're not doing a good job. And so I think that's a huge part. If we did those things, I believe we could see a major turnaround in our property tax issues, and it wouldn't take that long. But those are my thoughts right now on it. But yes, sir. Gaslighting is the correct word right there. And they just tell you the numbers and then say, and this is good, and we're supposed to go, oh, really? Okay. Well, it's not good. This little book right here, we did a survey, almost identical questions at a county fair, Iowa County, and we scored this survey. We surveyed 135 people, mostly Republicans, and we surveyed this. And when we scored it like a test, what do you think the average score was for about 9 or 10 questions here? Anybody want to guess? Of course, I know you haven't read the book, so it's hard to guess. But the average score was 26%. And so you pick one of these up and read it and tell me. But that was shocking to me because I knew it was going to be bad, but I didn't know it was going to be that bad. So our schools, again, need major reform. I've already been talking to a person who I think would be a good new director of education, Department of Education for Iowa. Already looking into this. There are lots of problems in our schools. I mean, the discipline problem in our schools is huge. I've talked to teachers that had bite marks and bruises, and one lady had a concussion because a kid hit her with something. I mean, you can't get any teaching done if you're dealing with that sort of thing all day long. And so, in Iowa City School District a few years ago, when you talk about budget, they had 7 full-time DEI directors. Now, DEI is diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's just that's just racism by another name. And so they, and of course, when we pass some laws against that, I'm sure they kept these people. They just call it they give them a new title and just erase it from their page and go on. But see, that's over $1 million budget right there for those 7 directors. And so, don't tell me that the money can't be spent better. I believe it can. But we do need some performance standards. Right now that they're grading on the curve. So if you grade on the curve, you can all make 60%, and so if everybody makes 60 and one guy gets 65%, well, he gets the A. But it's still 65%. It just shouldn't be that way. But that's what's going on in our educational system. So yeah, your point is well taken. And it's something that has to be fixed. And all it takes is common sense, just common sense. Yeah, those CO2 pipelines, it's 1,800 is actually a little bit low. It can be all the way up to 2,500 pounds per square inch. And if you've got a 36-inch or a 30-inch line like that ruptures, I mean, it can wipe out an entire city. And hopefully it would never happen, but it happened in Satire, Mississippi, and that was a small line, and 40 people went to the hospital. I mean, that line was only like this big. And so, that's a huge issue. So, CO2 pipelines are dangerous, no doubt about it. And so we don't need the CO2 pipeline to make our ethanol plants profitable. First off, they are the whole tax credit thing is just a scam to make a few people very rich. This idea they've been pushing lately, now that the session started, is that the corn prices will go up by $1 a bushel. Well, that's invented. There's no data to back that up. Besides that, I think we need to stop being bullied by California, who tells us that we won't buy your ethanol if it doesn't have a low carbon footprint. And well, maybe we ought to tell some of these people here in Iowa who own ethanol plants in Brazil that, well, stop competing with us and live in Iowa and do the right thing there. That would help a lot. That might raise corn prices right there. But we also can make our ethanol plants profitable, because that CO2 can, with just a small module, I'm not too small, but I mean, with just another addition to the ethanol plant, the CO2 can be converted to methane. And methane is a very marketable product. A lot of the ocean-going ships are burning methane now as their source of fuel. And so there's a big market for methane. There's lots of things we can do with the CO2 without putting it in a pipeline and shipping it to North Dakota, so that what's his name up there? Who's the guy, the Department of the Interior? Doug Burgum can get rich from his oil wells, because that's what they want to do. They want to squirt it in the ground to force more oil out, which hurts the ethanol industry because it's going to make oil cheaper, right? So it just doesn't make any sense. It's all about making a few people rich with tax credits, and we need to get rid of those tax credits. So, I mean, that's one thing we can't do on a state level. It's a federal issue, but we can certainly push for it and educate people and talk a little bit of common sense. And so, but there's plenty of things we can do to make our ethanol plants profitable and not hurt the farmers. Besides, there's big corporate entities that are, I think, involved in fixing the pricing. And if we get $1 a bushel rise in corn, then they're going to raise the input prices, and it's not going to amount to $1 a bushel if it even happened. So there's just a lot of common sense and a lot of detail that's not being told by these people. I don't know. It just seems like there's something nefarious going on in the background with these people that keep pushing for this pipeline. And I talked to Governor Reynolds about the pipeline early in 2023. When I first got to the legislature, I went to a hearing, and in the hearing, I heard people from around Iowa telling their stories about how their property was being, property rights were being trampled on. One lady was being sued because her property, she didn't want to sign a contract to the pipeline company, and she was in tears telling her story. So the next morning, I went to a coffee meeting with Governor Reynolds, and I had no idea that she even what she knew about it. And I just went for coffee and donuts is all I went for. But there was a lull in the conversation, so I asked Governor Reynolds, I said, I told her about this hearing I just came from, and I said, so what can we do to protect these people's property rights? And she just stared there, and it was like crickets for a long pause, no answer. And finally she said, well, we can't change the rules in the middle of the game because these companies have already spent a lot of money on this. And I said, of course we can. I said, these companies can't expect government just to do their bidding. I said, they know the risks that are involved. I mean, you can't expect that. And so, but that's the story, you know, it's all about protecting companies who've already invested a lot of money. And so what they did is they invested money and they got people all lined up ahead of time. And now they're over the barrel because they weren't expecting a strong grassroots resistance that has arisen. And so I think these people need to learn their lesson and realize you can't buy government. And I don't know, I'm not going to call any names here, but I heard about a person who I don't even know for sure who it was. But somebody asked this person if he was going to run for governor. And his reply was, no, I don't think I'll run for governor. It's much easier to buy a governor than it is to run for governor. And that was reported to me as a true statement. Again, I can't document it. So I'm not going to attach any names to it. But I'm just saying there are mentalities out there like that. And people think that way. And that's the swamp. That's what we have to drain. And we just have to do the right thing. So it feels that way. I'm going to have to agree, unfortunately. I mean, I appreciate a lot of things she's done, but there's a couple of key issues that I just can't. Yeah, I was aware of the Sheriff Marks issue, and I think that was a big mistake by Governor Reynolds and the Attorney General to go after him the way they did. They should have just gone, sat down, and had a real conversation and got it sorted out one-on-one, and it'd be all over, because he was literally just trying to protect the rule of law, and he was simply saying, if you don't have a warrant, you don't have the right paperwork, I'm not going to act against people. And so he said it strongly, and I think that's what got the burr under their saddle. So they had to act tough and respond, and whatever. But he took his post down, and then they wanted him to apologize using their wording, and he apologized with his wording, and that wasn't good enough. And one thing just led to another. It reminded me a little bit of some argument in junior high school. But anyway, it shouldn't have happened. He's just a good constitutional sheriff from what I've gathered. I don't know him personally, but did we talk about that? Yeah, I thought that was who. Yeah, we talked about that at the conference in Des Moines, right? Yeah. So I've met her and I know the story. Yeah. So go ahead.
I guess the question is, what can be done to prevent injustices like that from happening again?
Well, so you never got your money that you had to, your attorney fees, you never got reimbursed for that, right?
No.
Yeah, and that's called lawfare, and it was totally a criminal thing that the so-called law enforcement people did. I mean, as I remember the story, somebody came wanting to buy meat, and it was a federal agent under disguise, and he was told, well, you have to fill out a form and the right paperwork to make it all legal. So he took the paperwork and left, and then when he came back, he talked to somebody else, right? Not the same person.
Yeah, the second time he talked to my dad.
Yeah, so he talked to your dad, and then he implied that somehow he'd filled the paperwork out, so he sold him the meat, and then they got charged for selling meat. So that's just, I mean, besides the whole food free. Oh, you're her dad? Oh, okay, yeah. So anyway, I've only met her, but besides the issue of food freedom that needs to be reestablished, that was entrapment, is what that was. And it's just a shame that that happened. I don't know how the laws are. I don't know if there's something that can be done to go after this agent, a countersuit of some kind for doing that. It seems like if the judge threw it out, there ought to be opportunity to go after and recover your funds. But I think we could make some laws that would. I've always thought, even since I was a kid, I thought, if you go to court with somebody and you make a lawsuit that's just frivolous, and then you cost somebody a lot of money, it turns out you shouldn't have made this lawsuit in the first place, then the person that initiated that should have to pay for the losses for the other person. And it just seems like that ought to be the way it is. And I know the laws don't read that way, but I think that's something that should be fixed. But I'm just telling you that's how I think. I don't know what the process is exactly to get that done. Well, we've got judicial problems as well. I mean, I don't know a lot of judges personally, so I don't know who the good ones are and the bad ones, but I do believe we need a new system of appointing judges. Right now, the Bar Association has a big hand in who gets put on the short list that the governor is able to then appoint judges. So sometimes I feel like the short list doesn't have anybody that's good on it. And so you don't have an option. You don't have any good options. And so we keep ending up with these judges that are, not doing the right thing. So there are a lot of issues to fight here, but this is how we learn, is talking to people. I mean, because you get up to Des Moines, there is a flood of information that is like, it's just overwhelming. And so if we don't stay in touch with the people, you don't know what's going on. Yeah, I see your hand right back there.
2 questions. What are you going to do to stop Summit?
How to stop Summit? Well, hopefully they get it done this session. If that's bill that it's called 501, then they give it a new number. I forget the new number. It's a bill in the House right now. The House passed it and sent it to the Senate, and the bill simply says that there is no eminent domain for carbon pipelines, period. And it's just a simple, clean bill. Now, the problem is the Senate leadership is all in on this, and so I don't know what's going to happen. It might end up being a standoff again. Last year, it's money. Last year, they had 12 good senators that took a stand and said, we're not going to vote for the budget bill unless you bring this to the floor. That's how they got it passed last year, and then the governor vetoed it. So now we're back to square one, trying to get another bill in there, and it's ugly. Yeah, well, it's a nice sounding acronym, but that's about all it is. I mean, we know. I mean, anybody that was around the Capitol knew that Rob Sand was almost never there. He wasn't doing his job. All he's been doing is running for governor for the last 4 years. And in fact, one of his arguments is that the Republicans crippled his ability to audit. Well, that's not true. What he was asking for was all of our private medical information. He wanted to get records, which included all people's private health records. And there's HIPAA laws against that. And so he was demanding that he get it. And then so the bill that went through was restricted some of his ability to get that. And now he's claiming that they prevented him from doing his job. So it's always he said, she said, they said. And so the public, that's all the public hears. And so we have to really work hard at sorting out the facts. But I honestly think Rob Sand can be easily exposed if we just do the research and bring the facts out. And I'm kind of sad that he doesn't have a real opponent in the primary, because if you have an opponent, it forces you to answer questions that you otherwise wouldn't have to answer, and so your positions become more clear. That's why I really believe primaries are a good thing. It's almost like a no-no in the Republican Party right now. You don't challenge an incumbent. One state senator had invited all the governor candidates to come to his big event so that we could all talk and share what we believed. but he didn't invite me. And the reason was because I challenged Kim Reynolds before while she was still planning to run. And I guess he nearly worships her, so anyway, that was his problem. But I think primaries are an excellent thing. It makes us all better. When I ran for State House in 2022, we had a 6-way primary, the most people in a primary in the entire state. I got in first, and I thought, well, maybe nobody will run, but then somebody else jumped in, somebody else, and before you know it, we had 6 people. Everybody thought, well, nobody's going to win this. It's going to go to a convention. And so, but I won that primary with 55.5%, and the closest person had 13%. And won that primary because we worked hard, and we went all around our district, and now we're working hard on a state level as well. So I'm working as if to win it outright, but we also, if we have to go to the convention, we will, and that's why we're encouraging people to be a delegate and go to the district convention and go to the county convention and get elected to the district and state delegate position. And by the way, if you go to the county convention, you don't have to be a delegate. At the county convention, you can go as a citizen and get somebody to nominate you. You can run for district and state convention just as a citizen. You don't have to get elected at the caucus, and a lot of people don't realize that. So it's at the caucus where we elect delegates to the county, and then at the county they can elect anybody they want to be a delegate to the district and the state. So there's plenty of opportunity there. So.
But it is good to go to the caucus if you can.
Yeah, it is good to go to the caucus. That's Grassroots Iowa.
That's Monday, February 2nd.
Monday, February 2nd. Thank you, Carol. Carol's my secret weapon. She keeps everything going here. So I don't know what I'd do without her. We do accept donations. We are very grateful for it. You know my position on donations. It's for doing the right thing. So, anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
You ever meet Charlie Kirk?
I never did. No. That was a real tragedy. I am personally acquainted and have known for some years his pastor, Rob McCoy. I know him personally. So, what can you say? They tried to shut him up. I think all they did was amplify his voice many times over. But we're hoping for another move of God in this country. We need God's help in this country to restore it. That's for sure. But and Charlie was a real voice for that. So I really enjoy groups like this because just hearing the conversations around beforehand, you're with people that love America and just think in terms of common sense. And so talk to people all you can. Be an army of truth tellers. So yeah, you guys want to hear a funny story about campus days way back in the 80s? We were doing ministry on the University of Iowa campus, and how many of you remember when there was a coup in Grenada, the island of Grenada? Remember that? And President Reagan was about to send troops. I don't know. They were trying to figure out what to do. Well, the leader of our ministry, we had churches like campuses all around America, and the leader of our ministry called us on one night and said, "Why don't you guys all go out on campus tomorrow and take a sign that says we support President Reagan? But don't carry one sign, carry 4 signs and just stack them up. And if anybody goes by and gives you a thumb up, peel off a sign and give it to them. That way you'll quadruple your numbers." So we did that. We went on the Iowa City campus and we were saying we support President Reagan. And then people would come by and give us a thumbs up. So we'd say, "Here, hold the sign." And before you know it, there was 4 times as many of us. And then the news people showed up, and we told the news we support President Reagan, what have you. And that happened on several campuses around America. And the next day, the Wall Street Journal headline was, "Campuses across America rally behind President Reagan." And that was just one of those examples of how a little bit of organization and working together can create the narrative for an entire nation. I'll bet there wasn't more than 5 or 6 campuses that did it, but we were one of them, and we basically told the nation that campuses and young people were supporting President Reagan, and so I think it was just one of those issues that really made a big difference. So that's just a little history thing that we did. It's a fun memory. Oh, yes, they have. But how bad would it be if we did nothing? You know, Edmund Burke, English statesman, said that all that a good man must do to see evil triumph is nothing. And I'm not sure that's the exact quote, but another one he said was no one made a bigger mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. And so it's always important that we do whatever we can, and it makes a difference. And trust God to take it from there. Plant the seeds and let them grow. Absolutely correct. I totally agree with that. In fact, I have a website called AmericanBackbone.us. I haven't updated that website in a few years now, but it was totally devoted to exposing socialism and what's happening in our country. So it's still up, I think. AmericanBackbone.us. There's not much there, but there's articles there about socialism. But socialism is evil, and it's destructive, and we have to resist it every time we see it.
Dr. Bruce is going to take your test, and he's going to send you the results. How do we get them? How do we get them?
We all want to take the test and see how.
Okay. Let's do that. That's a good plan.
Why do you pick it on me for?
Well, thank you, folks. It's been a real pleasure being here. Thank you.
Let's give. Thank you, sir.